Wednesday, the state's Health Minister, Roger Cook, is making an announcement regarding end-of-life choices for West Australians.
Preeminent Australians and West Australians to provide advice to the government in relation to these matters. I can also confirm that the bill that will be presented to Parliament will be a conscience vote. That is, it will be up to each of the members of Parliament to form a view about this very sensitive and important matter in relation to whether they agree or not with the legislation going forward. What I'd like to do is just take you through the membership of the panel, and then I'll ask Malcolm to make a few comments. Now, what we tried to do was to make a very inclusive and open-minded panel, because they'll be responsible for discussing the aspirations of the West Australian community, and they'll be responsible for pulling together the best bill possible in regards to that consultation. Now, as I said, Malcolm McCusker will chair that committee. He'll be joined by Dr. Penny Flett, retired medical practitioner and, as you'd know, a former CEO of Brightwater and also former chairperson of the WA Aged Care Advisory Council. Dr. Scott Blackwell will also join the panel. He's a general practitioner with expertise in palliative care and aged care. Dr. Roger Hunt is a senior consultant in the Central Adelaide Palliative Care. He's an academic who is widely published in the areas of ethics, law and palliative care. Associate Professor Kirsten Auret is a Professor of Rural and Remote Medicine and Deputy Director of the Rural Clinical School of Western Australia. She's also a palliative care specialist and will also be joined by Dr. Alyssa Campbell, who's President of the WA Palliative Care in Western Australia and Consultant Geriatrician and Palliative Care Specialist. Dr. Simon Towler, who's the Clinical Lead at South Metropolitan Futures Program, staff specialist in intensive care at Fiona Stanley Hospital and former Chief Medical Officer. Kate George, who's a company director and senior lawyer specialising in human rights, international law and Indigenous matters, and also has experience in relation to the provision of medical services in remote communities. Fiona Seward is Commissioner of the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia and Senior Assistant Counsel for the State Solicitor's Office. Noreen Finn is a consumer representative with 30 years of experience in West Australia in the carer, disability, aged care and mental health sectors. And finally, Samantha Jenkinson, Executive Director of People with Disabilities WA and a former acting CEO of Australian Federation of Disability Organisations. She's a senior advocate and advisor to government in relation to disability. Now, as you're aware, voluntary assisted dying has widespread community support. A 2017 poll around voluntary assisted dying had community support around about 85%. But what we need to do is make sure that in crafting this legislation that we are sensitive and consultative and inclusive of views right across the community. And that's why I think Mr McCusker will provide such an outstanding role as chair of the Ministerial Expert Panel, and I'd invite him to make some comments.
Thank you, Minister. It is my great honour to accept the appointment as chair of this advisory panel. It's an expert panel, as you've heard, and the experts are across quite a range of different but very relevant professions and backgrounds. The task of the panel, which I chair, is not to advise the government on whether or not there should be a bill on voluntary assisted dying, but to advise as to the content or the suggested content of such a bill. As you would probably be aware, throughout the world there are different approaches taken to this kind of legislation. What we want to ensure and we want to advise the government on is a form of legislation which brings into account at least two important qualities, one being safety and the other being compassion. Safety, you're probably very familiar with the importance of that. Compassion at the same time, to show compassion towards people who are facing inevitable death. Thank you.
Okay, could I start with the membership? So, McCusker, you're saying that it's to guide the government towards legislation
Yes.
to provide for assisted dying. But I'm assuming, so are all the members of this panel in agreement about the support or the need for assisted dying, or are some of them actually opponents of assisted dying? Because some of those people come from the palliative care area.
Well, the answer that I can give is that I don't know, because we haven't taken a poll of those who are invited to become panel members to see who are for and who are against voluntary assisted dying. Because the important task of the panel is not to make a recommendation on that question, important though it is, but the content of the legislation which is going to adopt the recommendation of the committee.
And that's the point I'm trying to get to, because if some of them, if you know, some of them don't, and you don't know, but if some of them don't support assisted dying,
Yes.
you're asking them to put aside their beliefs to provide the government with legislation that would allow for assisted dying.
Jeff, can I answer some of that question by way of saying that obviously if people have agreed to be on the panel, they accept that there's a role for a voluntary assisted dying. But it's true to say that there are varying views within that panel about what form it should take and the veracity with which it is advocated for and how we should move forward. So that's why I think it's a panel which is inclusive, but it's not passive in terms of their views. And I think what you will see is robust discussion, but very informed discussion, but critical analysis as well in relation to it.